The stranger rode into Pinon, New Mexico on a dust-covered mare, her dark hair wild beneath a battered hat. And the moment Fletcher Sutton saw her stumble through the saloon doors with blood on her sleeve and desperation in her eyes, he knew his careful, quiet life was about to change forever. She collapsed against the bar, breathing hard, and Fletcher rose from his poker game without thinking. The other men at the table exchanged glances but said nothing as he crossed the worn floorboards. Up close, she was younger than he had first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with striking green eyes that held a wariness he recognized from his own reflection on bad days. "You hurt?" Fletcher asked, keeping his voice low and steady the way he did with spooked horses. She looked up at him, taking in his tall frame, the honest face beneath sandy brown hair, the worn but clean clothes of a working cowboy. Something in her expression shifted, hardened. "I am fine. Just need a whiskey and I will be gone. That blood on your arm says different." Fletcher nodded to the bartender. "Get her some water, Tom, and clean cloth. I said I am fine." Her voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut, but her hand trembled as she reached for the glass Tom set down. She drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "You should stay away from me, cowboy. I bring only trouble and sorrow wherever I go." Fletcher felt something stir in his chest, something that had been dormant for a long time. He pulled out the chair beside her. "Then I guess I will just have to turn them into joy." She stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You do not even know me." "No, madam, I do not. But I know that look in your eyes. I know what it is like to be running. And I know Pinon is not much, but it is a decent place to catch your breath." He accepted the cloth from Tom and held it out to her. "At least let me help with that arm before you ride on." For a long moment, she did not move. The saloon continued its usual evening rhythm around them, piano music tinkling in the corner, men laughing over cards and whiskey. Outside, the New Mexico sun was setting, painting the dusty street in shades of copper and gold. It was September of 1878, and the territory was still raw and wild, a place where people came to disappear or to start over. Finally, she took the cloth. "My name is Paloma Garcia. Fletcher Sutton. I work the Triple R Ranch about 5 miles north of here." He watched as she carefully rolled up her sleeve, revealing a long gash that looked like it had come from barbed wire or maybe a knife. "That needs stitching. I have had worse." "I do not doubt it. But infection does not care how tough you are." Fletcher turned to Tom. "Doc Morrison's still above the general store, far as I know." Paloma shook her head quickly. "No doctor, no one can know I am here." "Who is looking for you?" Fletcher asked, though he kept his tone casual, non-judgmental. She pressed the cloth against her wound, her jaw tight. "People who would not think twice about burning this whole town down to find me. That is why I need to keep moving. That is why you should forget you ever saw me." Fletcher considered this. He was 26 years old, had been working cattle since he was 14, and had learned to read situations quickly. Paloma was genuinely scared, but there was steel in her too, a strength that told him she was not some helpless victim. Whatever trouble followed her, she had been fighting it hard. "The Triple R is hiring," he said. "We could use someone who knows horses. Boss does not ask too many questions if you do good work." "You are insane." "Been called worse." He stood and dropped a few coins on the bar. "There is a boarding house 2 streets over run by Mrs. Chen. Clean rooms, decent meals, and she minds her own business. At least stay the night. Get that arm tended. If you still want to run in the morning, I would not stop you." Paloma looked at him for a long time, those green eyes searching his face for something. "Why are you doing this?" Fletcher thought about the question. He could have given her a dozen practical reasons, but what came out was the truth. "Because about 3 years ago, I was the one stumbling into town half dead and desperate, and a rancher named Robert Reeves gave me a chance when he had no reason to. Figured it was time I paid that forward. She stood slowly, testing her balance. I am serious about the trouble, I believe you, and you are still offering help. Yes, madam. Something flickered across her face, an emotion too quick to name. Then I suppose I would be a fool to refuse. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a low adobe building with a covered porch and flowering plants in clay pots. The Chinese woman who answered Fletcher's knock was small and efficient, taking in Paloma's disheveled state with a single glance before nodding and quoting a rate. Fletcher paid for 3 nights before Paloma could protest. "I will pay you back," she said as Mrs. Chen led them down a narrow hallway, not worried about it. The room was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the dusty street. Mrs. Chen brought hot water and more clean cloth, along with a bottle of whiskey and a sewing kit. "You need doctor?" she asked Paloma. "No, thank you." Mrs. Chen nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind her. Paloma sank onto the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. Fletcher set the supplies on the washstand. "I can stitch it if you want," he offered. "Done it plenty of times on cattle and horses, even on myself a few times." Paloma managed a weak smile. "You always compare women to livestock, only the stubborn ones." Fletcher grinned and was rewarded with a soft laugh. "That is better. Now let me see." She rolled up her sleeve again, and Fletcher washed his hands before examining the wound in the fading light. It was deep but clean, probably made by a blade. He worked carefully, threading the needle and pouring whiskey over both it and the cut. Paloma hissed but did not pull away as he began to stitch. "So what did you do?" he asked conversationally. "Rob a bank, steal someone's horse. I witnessed something I should not have." Her voice was quiet. 3 men killed a merchant in Santa Fe over a gambling debt. They saw me see them do it. I ran. Fletcher tied off a stitch. "That was 2 weeks ago. More, 3 weeks. I have been moving every night, sleeping rough during the day. They are persistent. 3 men, you get a good look at them." "Good enough. The leader has a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. The other 2 are brothers, I think. Big men, both with red hair." Fletcher paused in his work. He knew men fitting those descriptions. "The Garrett Gang, notorious for violence and ruthless in their pursuit of anyone who crossed them. They operated mostly in the territories, staying just ahead of any real law enforcement. If they wanted Paloma dead, they would not stop looking." "How did you get away from them for this long?" he asked. "I grew up in the mountains. My father taught me to track, to hunt, to disappear." Sadness crept into her voice. "He died 5 years ago, my mother 3 years before that. I have been on my own since. I am sorry. Everyone loses people, that is just life." But her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Fletcher finished the stitching and bandaged her arm carefully. "There. Should heal clean if you keep it dry and change the dressing every day." "Thank you." Paloma looked up at him. "You are a strange man, Fletcher Sutton." "How so?" "Most cowboys I have met are drunk or mean or both. You are neither." "Give me time," he joked, but her expression stayed serious. "I mean it. Why risk yourself for someone you do not know?" Fletcher packed up the supplies, considering his words. "My parents died when I was 12. Cholera. I spent 2 years drifting, working whatever jobs I could find, getting into trouble. By the time I was 14, I was half wild and full of anger. Robert Reeves found me trying to steal one of his horses. Instead of having me arrested or shot, he offered me work. Taught me everything I know about ranching, about being a man worth something. He died last spring, left the ranch to his daughter and her husband." He met Paloma's eyes. "Point is, kindness saved my life. Seems wrong not to pass it along." She was quiet for a moment. "The world needs more people like you." The world needs more people willing to help each other. That is all. Fletcher stood to leave, but Paloma caught his hand. Her fingers were calloused strong. If those men show up here, you do not know me, you never saw me. Promise me. I cannot promise that, Fletcher. But I promise I would not let them take you without a fight. He squeezed her hand gently. Get some rest. I will be back in the morning with breakfast. He left before she could argue, stepping out into the cool night air. Pinyon was settling down for the evening, lights glowing in windows, the sound of a guitar drifting from somewhere down the street. It was a peaceful town, one of the few places in New Mexico where different cultures mixed without too much friction. Spanish families, Chinese immigrants, displaced Southern families from after the war, all trying to make a life in the harsh desert landscape. Fletcher walked to the livery stable where he kept his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Sage. He checked on the animal, made sure he had grain and clean water, then headed to the small room he rented above the feed store. It was not much, just a bed and a trunk for his belongings, but it served him well enough during the times he stayed in town. He lay awake for a long time that night, thinking about Paloma Garcia and her green eyes full of ghosts, thinking about the Garrett gang and what it would mean if they came to Pinyon, thinking about how sometimes fate put people in your path for a reason, and how the brave thing was to see where that path led. Morning came bright and hot, as it always did in September. Fletcher washed, dressed in clean clothes, and headed to the diner where Maria Gonzalez made the best breakfast in 3 counties. He ordered extra, packed it carefully, and carried it to the boarding house. Mrs. Chen let him in with a knowing look. She up, been pacing since dawn. Fletcher climbed the stairs and knocked on Paloma's door. She opened it quickly, already dressed in the same dusty clothes from yesterday. Her hair was braided now, hanging over one shoulder, and despite the weariness in her face, she looked determined. I should go, she said before he could speak. It is not safe to stay, or you could eat breakfast and hear me out. Fletcher held up the package, Maria's biscuits and gravy, still hot. Paloma wavered, then stepped aside to let him in. They sat at the small table by the window, and Fletcher unwrapped the food. The smell of sausage gravy and fresh biscuits filled the room, and he heard Paloma's stomach growl. When did you last eat? He asked. Yesterday. Maybe the day before. She took a biscuit and bit into it, her eyes closing briefly in pleasure. Oh, this is good. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Fletcher spoke again. I talked to Robert's daughter last night, Catherine. She and her husband John run the Triple R now. They are willing to hire you on, no questions asked. You would have a bunk in the main house, meals, $30 a month. They do not know me. They trust my judgment, and they are good people. Fletcher poured coffee from the pot Mrs. Chen had brought up. Look, I know you think running is the only option, but you cannot run forever, Paloma. Eventually you will collapse or make a mistake or just run out of places to hide. Here, you would have people watching your back. You would have a chance to rest, to heal, to figure out what comes next. What comes next is those men finding me and killing me, and anyone who gets in their way. Maybe, or maybe we find another solution. Fletcher leaned forward. There is a territorial marshal who comes through Pinyon every few months. Name is Daniel Wright. Honest man, which is rare. If you testified about what you saw, he could arrest the Garrett gang. Paloma shook her head. My word against theirs. Without proof, I would be dead before any trial. Not if we kept you safe. Not if enough people stood with you. You are asking people to risk their lives for a stranger. I am asking you to have a little faith. Fletcher caught her gaze and held it. You said you bring trouble and sorrow. All right, but trouble can be faced and sorrow can be healed. You do not have to carry everything alone. She looked away out the window at the dusty street below. A woman walked past with a basket, two children chasing each other in circles around her skirts. Normal life, mundane and precious. "I do not remember what it is like to stay in one place," Paloma said quietly. "To not look over my shoulder every minute, to sleep through a whole night." "Then maybe it is time to remember." She was quiet for so long that Fletcher thought she would refuse. Then she took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, I will try it your way, but the moment I think I am putting people in danger, I am gone." "Agreed, agreed." They shook hands, and Fletcher felt that same stir in his chest, that sense of something significant happening. He told himself it was just the satisfaction of helping someone in need, but he knew that was not quite true. There was something about Paloma, about her strength and her vulnerability, that called to something deep inside him. The ride out to the Triple R Ranch took about an hour, following a dusty trail that wound through scrub brush and juniper trees. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, all red rock and endless sky. Paloma rode the mare she had come in on, a pretty roan that was better bred than her tack suggested. "What is her name?" Fletcher asked, nodding at the horse. "Luna. I raised her from a foal. She is a fine animal, good lines. My father bred horses before he died. Luna is the last of his stock." Paloma ran a hand along the mare's neck. "She is all I have left of home." Fletcher wanted to ask more, but something in Paloma's expression stopped him. Some griefs were too tender to probe, at least not yet. Instead, he pointed ahead to where the ranch buildings were coming into view. The Triple R sprawled across a shallow valley, with a main house, two barns, a bunkhouse, and various corrals and outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, lazy brown shapes against the gold grass. It was a prosperous ranch by territory standards, supporting about 20 hands and running nearly 1,000 head. Catherine Reeves came out to meet them, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a sturdy woman in her early 30s, with her father's direct gaze and capable manner. Her husband John followed, a tall, quiet man who had been a cavalry officer before settling down to ranch life. "So you are Paloma," Catherine said, looking her over frankly. "Fletcher says you are good with horses." "I am. We have a string of half-broke Mustangs that need work." "Think you can handle them?" "Yes, madam." Catherine nodded. "Then you are hired. Bunkhouse is full right now, but we have a room off the kitchen that was the old housekeeper's quarters. You would be living in the main house. That all right with you?" Paloma glanced at Fletcher, who gave her an encouraging nod. "That would be fine, thank you." "Do not thank me yet. We work hard here, sun up to sundown. In return, you get 3 meals, a bed, and wages. Sound fair? More than fair." "Good. John will show you to your room and give you the tour." "Fletcher, you got time to look at that ornery paint in the north corral? He threw Miguel yesterday." "Yes, madam." As John led Paloma away, Catherine turned to Fletcher with a knowing look. "You want to tell me what is really going on?" Fletcher filled her in on the basics, keeping his voice low. Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious. "The Garrett gang," she said when he finished. "I have heard of them. Nasty bunch. I know it is a risk. Life is a risk. My father taught me that." Catherine looked toward where Paloma had disappeared into the house. "She has that same look you had when you first came here. Like a wounded animal that has forgotten how to trust. If you think we can help her, then we will help her." "Thank you. Just be careful, Fletcher. I can see the way you look at her." Fletcher felt heat rise in his face. "I just met her yesterday. And my parents knew each other 3 days before my father proposed. Sometimes you just know," Catherine smiled. "Just saying matters of the heart can complicate things. I am just trying to keep her alive, Catherine." "Sure you are." Fletcher left her laughing and headed to deal with the paint horse, but his mind was elsewhere. Was Catherine right? Was there something more than simple compassion drawing him to Paloma? He barely knew her. She could be gone in a week, or dead in a month if the Garrett gang found her. It would be foolish to let himself feel anything. But when he saw her later that afternoon, working with one of the Mustangs in the round pen, all his reasonable arguments evaporated. She moved with such grace and confidence, reading the horse's body language, knowing exactly when to push and when to yield. The Mustang, a wild-eyed bay that had been kicking anyone who got close, was already calming under her steady handling. "She is something," John said, coming to stand beside Fletcher at the fence. "That she is. Catherine told me about her situation. We will keep her safe. I appreciate that." John was quiet for a moment. "My sister was killed by men like the Garrett gang back in Missouri before the war. They were raiders, claimed to be fighting for the cause, but really they just wanted an excuse to hurt people. She was 14. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Fletcher heard the old pain beneath it. "Point is, I know what it is to want justice for the ones who cannot fight back. You need anything, you let me know." Fletcher clasped his shoulder. "Thank you, John." They watched Paloma work until the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the whole valley in shades of amber and rose. When she finally released the Mustang and came over to the fence, she was sweating but smiling, a real smile that transformed her whole face. "That is a good horse," she said. "Smart, just needs patience." "You have a gift," Fletcher told her. She ducked her head, embarrassed. "My father taught me. He said horses speak a language we have forgotten, and if we want to work with them, we have to remember it again." "He sounds like a wise man." He was. Paloma climbed over the fence, landing lightly beside them. "Thank you again for this, for everything. You have not seen your room yet. Might want to hold off on the thanks." But the room was fine, small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out on the mountains. Catherine had left fresh clothes on the bed, a practical split skirt and several shirts that looked like they would fit. "My old riding clothes," Catherine explained when Paloma protested. "They are just taking up space in my trunk. You would be doing me a favor." Paloma's eyes grew bright, and Fletcher realized with a start that she might cry. "You are all too kind. We take care of our own here. You are one of us now." Catherine squeezed her shoulder and left, shooing Fletcher along with her. Dinner that night was a lively affair, with the ranch hands crowding around the long table in the dining room. Catherine and John sat at the head, with Fletcher and Paloma beside them. The men were curious about the new hire but polite, asking questions about her experience with horses and where she had learned her skills. Paloma answered carefully, giving away little personal information but enough to satisfy curiosity. Fletcher saw how she watched everyone, noting exits, keeping her back to the wall. Old habits from weeks of running. He wanted to tell her she was safe, but he knew it would take more than words to convince her. After dinner, he found her on the porch, staring out at the star-filled sky. The desert night was cool, a relief after the day's heat, and the sound of crickets filled the air. "You did good today," he said, settling onto the step beside her. It felt good to work, to do something normal. She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart. It might not. You do not know that, no, but I know worrying yourself sick would not change anything." Fletcher looked up at the stars, finding the constellations his mother had taught him long ago. "My ma used to say that worry is like a rocking chair. Gives you something to do but does not get you anywhere." Paloma huffed a small laugh. "Your mother sounds wise too." She was. They both were, my parents. I wish you could have met them. Tell me about them." So Fletcher did, surprised by how easily the words came. He told her about his mother's garden, his father's terrible jokes, the way they had built a life from nothing on a hardscrabble farm in Kansas. He told her about their deaths, the cholera that swept through their county, taking so many. He told her about the years after, the darkness and anger, until Robert Reeves had offered him a path forward. Paloma listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she began to speak, her voice soft in the darkness. She told him about growing up in the mountains near Taos, about her father's horse ranch and her mother's herb garden, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about sleeping under the stars during summer drives to market, about her mother's illness, a wasting sickness that took her slowly over 2 years, about her father's grief, how he had poured it all into his horses and his daughter, teaching her everything he knew. And then about the winter 5 years ago, when her father had gone out to check on the herd during a storm and never came back. They found him 3 days later, frozen beside a calf he had been trying to save. "I sold the ranch," she said. "Could not bear to stay there without them. I have been drifting since, working ranches and horse farms, never staying long. I thought that was what I wanted, to keep moving, to not get attached." She looked at Fletcher. "But maybe I was just running from different things. Maybe we all are in one way or another." "What are you running from, Fletcher Sutton?" He considered the question. "The fear that I do not deserve the good things I have, that any minute it will all be taken away like it was before." Paloma reached over and took his hand. "Thank you for trusting me with that." Fletcher looked down at their joined hands, calloused palm against calloused palm, and felt something shift inside him. This was more than compassion, more than wanting to help. This was the beginning of something real, something that scared him precisely because it mattered. The days settled into a rhythm. Paloma worked with the horses, gentling the wild ones with patience and skill that impressed even the most experienced hands. She took her meals with the household, slowly relaxing into the routine of ranch life. Fletcher found excuses to work near wherever she was, telling himself he was just keeping an eye on her, making sure she felt welcome. But Catherine's knowing looks told him he was not fooling anyone. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The wound on Paloma's arm healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar. She began to smile more, to join in the conversations at dinner, to look less like she expected violence around every corner. Fletcher watched her blossom like a desert flower after rain, and his heart ached with the beauty of it. They fell into the habit of sitting on the porch after dinner, talking about everything and nothing. He learned that she loved thunderstorms, that she could play the guitar, that she had a wicked sense of humor once she felt comfortable enough to show it. She learned about his love of books, his terrible singing voice, his dream of someday having his own small ranch. One evening, nearly a month after she had arrived, Paloma looked at him with those striking green eyes and said, "I think I am falling in love with you, Fletcher Sutton." His heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "You think? I am pretty sure," she smiled. "Is that all right?" Instead of answering, he leaned over and kissed her, soft and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. Instead, she kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his cheek, and Fletcher felt like he was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Paloma rested her forehead against his. "So I guess that means you feel the same way." "Yes, madam." Fletcher laughed, giddy with joy. "I have been falling since the moment you walked into that saloon. That is very foolish of you. Probably the smartest thing I have ever done." They sat close together, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Fletcher thought that this must be what happiness felt like. This warmth in his chest, this sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. But happiness, as he should have known, was a fragile thing in the territories. The next day, a stranger rode into the ranch asking questions about a woman matching Paloma's description. He was lean and hungry-looking, with eyes that missed nothing. John sent him on his way, saying they had not seen anyone like that, but the damage was done. "They are getting close," Paloma said when John told them. Her face had gone pale. "I need to leave." "Not a chance," Fletcher said. "We are not letting them run you off. This is exactly what I was afraid of. I have brought danger to people who showed me nothing but kindness." Catherine spoke up from where she stood in the doorway. "Then let us end it. Let us send for Marshal Wright and finish this." "The Marshal is 3 weeks away at least," John pointed out, "and we do not know how many men the Garrett gang has or when they might show up." "Then we prepare," Fletcher said. "We are not helpless, and Paloma is not alone anymore." They spent the next few days turning the ranch into a defensible position. John, with his cavalry experience, directed the effort. They set up watch posts, made sure everyone was armed, and moved the women and children to the main house. Word spread to neighboring ranches, and men Fletcher had worked alongside for years showed up to help, asking no questions. Paloma hated it. She paced the house like a caged animal, guilt written all over her face. Fletcher stayed close, trying to reassure her. "This is not your fault," he told her for the 100th time. "How is it not? These people are risking everything for me." "No. They are standing up to bullies who think they can terrorize innocent people. That is different." Fletcher caught her hands. "You saw a murder, Paloma. You are the only witness. That means something. That means you have a responsibility to see justice done, and we have a responsibility to protect you while you do it. What if someone gets hurt? What if we let evil men win because we are too scared to fight?" Fletcher pulled her close. "I am not going to lie to you and say this is not dangerous. It is. But some things are worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for." She buried her face against his chest. "I cannot lose you. I just found you. You are not going to lose me." He kissed the top of her head. "We are going to get through this, and then we are going to have the most boring, peaceful life you can imagine. I promise." The Garrett gang arrived on a Tuesday, 4 men riding in hard just after dawn. They were led by the man with the scar, just as Paloma had described, and they came ready for violence. But they found the ranch ready for them. John met them at the front gate with 10 armed men at his back. Fletcher was among them, his rifle held steady, his heart pounding but his hands calm. He had learned to shoot as a boy, hunting rabbits and deer, and Robert Reeves had made sure he practiced until he could hit what he aimed at. "This is private property," John called out. "State your business or move along." The scarred man grinned, showing bad teeth. "We are looking for a woman. Dark hair, green eyes. Heard she might be working here." "You heard wrong." "Now, I do not think so. Fellow in town said you had a new horse hand matching that description." The man leaned forward in his saddle. "We will pay good money for information about her whereabouts." "She is a material witness in a murder case," John said evenly. "Which makes you criminals trying to silence her. I suggest you turn around and ride out while you still can." The scarred man's expression hardened. "You do not want to make enemies of us. Too late for that." For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then one of the red-haired brothers reached for his gun and everything exploded. Fletcher never remembered the details of the fight clearly afterward. There was gunfire, loud in the morning air, men shouting, the acrid smell of gunpowder. He fired twice, saw one of the red-haired men fall. Beside him, John was calm and precise, each shot deliberate. The fight was over in less than a minute. 2 of the gang members were dead, including the scarred leader. The other 2 had wheeled their horses and fled, wounded but alive. Nobody on the ranch side was hurt. Fletcher lowered his rifle, his hands shaking now that the danger had passed. John clapped his shoulder. "Good shooting. Is it over, for now? Those other 2 would not come back, not without their leader." John looked at the bodies. "We will send word to the marshal. Let him clean this up official-like." Paloma came running from the house, her face white. She looked at the dead men, then at Fletcher. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine. We are all fine." She threw her arms around him, holding him so tight he could barely breathe. "I was so scared." "I know, me too." He stroked her hair, trying to calm the trembling in his own limbs. He had never killed a man before. The weight of it sat heavy in his chest, but when he thought about what those men would have done to Paloma, he could not regret it. The marshal arrived 3 weeks later, as predicted. Daniel Wright was a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. He took Paloma's statement about the murder in Santa Fe, examined the bodies of the Garrett gang members, and talked to everyone who had been involved in the fight. "You did good work here," he told John and Fletcher. "That gang has been terrorizing this territory for 2 years. Glad to see them finished." "What happens now?" Paloma asked. "I will take your statement back to Santa Fe. Combined with the bodies and the testimony of these good folks, I think we can close the case on the original murder. You might have to testify at some point, but you are free to go on with your life, Miss Garcia." Wright smiled. "Wherever that might be." Paloma looked at Fletcher. "I think I would like to stay here, if that is all right." "More than all right," Catherine said before Fletcher could respond. "You are part of this family now." After the marshal left, taking the bodies and his official reports with him, life slowly returned to normal. The men who had come from neighboring ranches went home. The watch posts were dismantled. The weapons were locked back in the gun safe. And Fletcher and Paloma, who had been so careful before, so aware of all the reasons they should not get close, finally stopped fighting what they both wanted. He proposed on a cool October evening, with the sky full of stars and the desert night peaceful around them. He had nothing fancy, just a simple silver band he had bought from the jeweler in town. But Paloma cried and said yes and kissed him until they were both breathless. They married a month later in the little church in Pinon, with Catherine and John standing up with them and half the town in attendance. Paloma wore a white dress that Maria Gonzalez had sewn, and Fletcher wore his one good suit. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher felt like the luckiest man in New Mexico. Catherine and John gave them 3 days off for a honeymoon, which they spent in a small cabin up in the mountains, just the two of them and the endless sky. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies, and talked about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Paloma said, lying with her head on Fletcher's chest. "At least 3, maybe 4. "That sounds perfect." Fletcher ran his fingers through her long dark hair. "And maybe someday a small ranch of our own, nothing fancy, just enough land for some horses and cattle. And a garden. I want a garden like my mother had." "Then you will have one." They returned to the Triple R and settled into married life. Catherine gave them a small house on the edge of the property, 2 rooms that had been used for storage but which they cleaned and turned into a home. Paloma continued working with the horses, her reputation spreading until people were bringing animals from all over the territory for her to gentle. Fletcher worked the cattle, saved his wages, and dreamed of the future. A year passed. Then, too, Paloma became pregnant in the spring of 1880, and Fletcher thought his heart might burst from joy. He fussed over her constantly until she laughingly told him to stop, that she was not made of glass. Their son was born in January of 1881, during a cold snap that frosted the windows. He came into the world red-faced and screaming, perfect in every way. They named him Robert, after the man who had saved Fletcher all those years ago. Fletcher held his son and wept, overwhelmed by the fierce love that surged through him. This tiny person, so helpless and new, was depending on him. He vowed to be the kind of father his own had been, the kind who showed his children every day that they were loved and valued. Paloma recovered quickly from the birth, though Fletcher still treated her like she might break for weeks afterward. She rolled her eyes at his overprotectiveness, but also kissed him and told him she loved him, so he figured she did not mind too much. Little Robert was an easy baby, curious and calm, with his mother's green eyes and his father's sandy hair. He grew like a weed, strong and healthy, and by his first birthday he was already trying to toddle after his father. "He is going to be a cowboy," Fletcher said proudly, watching his son reach for his hat. "Or a horse trainer," Paloma countered. "Did you see how he looks at the horses?" He could be both. He could be whatever he wants. They were happy. Life was not always easy, the work was hard, and the territory could be harsh, but they had each other, and that made everything else bearable. Fletcher would sometimes think back to that September day when Paloma had stumbled into the saloon, wounded and desperate, and marvel at how far they had come. When Robert was 2, John came to Fletcher with a proposal. "Catherine and I have been talking. We are not getting any younger and we do not have children. We want to start transitioning the ranch to you and Paloma. Eventually, the R would be yours to run." Fletcher stared at him. "John, I cannot accept that." "Why not? You have been here longer than anyone except me and Catherine. You know this place inside and out. And Paloma has built up the horse side of the operation until it is bringing in almost as much as the cattle. You have earned this. But there are other hands who have been here longer, who have more claim. None of them have your head for business or your way with people. None of them would care for this place the way you would." John smiled. "Besides, Robert would have wanted it this way. He thought of you as a son." Fletcher felt his throat tighten. "I do not know what to say. Say yes. Talk to Paloma. Think about it. But know that Catherine and I are serious about this." Paloma cried when he told her, happy tears that she blamed on being pregnant again. Their second child was due in the fall, and she was convinced it was a girl this time. She was right. Their daughter Alina was born in October of 1883, dark-haired like her mother and with lungs that could probably be heard in Texas. She was fierce and funny from the start, demanding attention and affection in equal measure. Fletcher fell in love all over again, amazed that he could feel this way about 2 separate people. His heart, which had once been so closed off and guarded, now seemed to have infinite room for love. They formally took over management of the R when Robert was 5 and Alina was 2. Catherine and John stayed on, helping and advising, but the day-to-day running was now Fletcher and Paloma's responsibility. It was daunting, but they worked well together, each bringing their own strengths to the operation. The ranch thrived under their management. Fletcher expanded the cattle operation, taking advantage of new markets opening up as the railroad spread through the territory. Paloma developed a breeding program for the horses, producing animals that were known throughout New Mexico for their quality and temperament. They added on to the house as their family grew. A third child, a son they named Thomas, arrived in 1886. Then another daughter, Sarah, in 1889. Each child was welcomed with joy, each one fitting perfectly into the family they were building. Fletcher taught his children to ride, to rope, to understand the land and the animals. Paloma taught them to read, to think, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their background. Together, they built a legacy of hard work and kindness. The years passed in the way that good years do, both slowly and quickly at once. There were challenges, of course, droughts and disease, market crashes, and harsh winters. But they weathered each storm together, leaning on each other and on the community they had built. Robert grew into a serious young man with a talent for numbers and business. Alina was wild and free-spirited, equally comfortable in a dress at church or in trousers working cattle. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, happiest when he was working with the horses. Sarah, the baby, was a perfect combination of all her siblings, charming and capable by turns. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Fletcher took Paloma back up to that mountain cabin where they had spent their honeymoon. The children were old enough to stay with Catherine and John, and Fletcher wanted time alone with his wife. They sat on the porch as the sun set, just like they used to sit on the porch of the ranch house all those years ago. Paloma leaned against him and Fletcher wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here instead of running, not for a single moment." She turned to look at him. "You gave me everything, Fletcher. A home, a family, a life I never dreamed I could have. You took my trouble and sorrow and you did exactly what you promised. You turned them into joy. We did that together." "Yes, we did." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to help a scared woman in a saloon. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for giving me a reason to be brave." Fletcher held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you, Paloma Sutton, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I love you too, always." They stayed in the cabin for 3 days, just like they had 15 years before. They made love and talked and simply enjoyed being together without the constant demands of children and ranch work. It was a gift, that time, a reminder of who they had been and who they still were beneath all the responsibilities of life. When they returned to the ranch, Robert met them with news. "Papa, there is a man here looking to buy horses. Says he heard about Mama's breeding program and wants to see what we have." The man turned out to be an army officer, looking to purchase mounts for the cavalry. It was the beginning of a lucrative contract that would help secure the ranch's finances for years to come. Fletcher watched Paloma negotiate with the officer, calm and confident, and marveled again at the woman who had stumbled into his life wounded and desperate. She had become so much more than he could have imagined. Not just his wife and the mother of his children, but a respected businesswoman, a pillar of their community, a woman who commanded respect wherever she went. That night, after the officer had left and the children were in bed, Fletcher found Paloma in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. He leaned against the stall door, watching her work. "What?" she asked, sensing his gaze. "Just thinking about how lucky I am. You are easy to please, Fletcher Sutton. No, I just know a good thing when I see it." He stepped into the stall and pulled her close. "You are magnificent. You know that," she laughed. "I am covered in hay and probably smell like horse." "You are magnificent," he repeated, and kissed her until she stopped laughing and started kissing him back. The mare foaled that night, a strong colt that would grow into one of their finest stallions. Fletcher and Paloma stayed with the mother and baby until dawn, making sure all was well, then walked hand in hand back to the house as the sun rose over the New Mexico desert. Their children grew and eventually started families of their own. Robert married a teacher from Santa Fe and took over the business side of the ranch. Elena shocked everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women attorneys in the territory. Thomas stayed on the ranch, working with the horses just like his mother. Sarah married a doctor and moved to Albuquerque but visited often. Fletcher and Paloma became grandparents, then great-grandparents. The Triple R continued to prosper, passed down through the generations they had created. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold until everyone knew it by heart. Fletcher Sutton, the cowboy who had offered kindness to a desperate stranger. Paloma Garcia, the woman who had been brave enough to accept help instead of running. The love that had grown between them, tested by danger but never broken, stronger than any hardship they faced. They grew old together, which Fletcher considered the greatest blessing of all. So many people did not get that chance, lost their loves too early to illness or accident or violence. but he and Paloma were granted years, decades even, to love each other. On a spring morning in 1919, Fletcher woke to find Paloma still asleep beside him, her hair now gray but still beautiful, her face lined with the years but precious beyond measure. He reached over and took her hand, and she stirred, opening those green eyes that still had the power to take his breath away. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, my love. How long have we been married now? 40 years, give or take, 40 years," she smiled. "It went by so fast." "Yes, but I would not change a single day. Not even the day the Garrett gang showed up, especially not that day. That was the day we stopped running and started living." Fletcher brought her hand to his lips. "That was the day we proved that love is stronger than fear." Paloma squeezed his hand. "Do you remember what I said to you that first night? In the saloon, you said you brought only trouble and sorrow, and you said you would turn them into joy." Her eyes glistened with tears. "You kept your promise, Fletcher. Every single day for 40 years, you kept your promise. It was not hard. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." They lay there together as the sun rose, filling their room with golden light. Outside, they could hear the ranch coming to life, the sounds that had been the soundtrack to their lives together. Cattle lowing, horses nickering, grandchildren laughing as they ran to the barn. Fletcher thought about the scared young man he had been, the one who had lost everything and thought he would never have a family again. He thought about the desperate woman who had ridden into Piñon, expecting to die. And he thought about all the moments between then and now, the accumulation of days and years that made up a life well lived. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For letting me love you, for loving me back, for building this life with me." Fletcher turned his head to look at her. "For being my joy." Paloma leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Thank you for being mine." They rose and dressed and went out to face another day on the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren were visiting, filling the house with noise and love. There would be a big lunch. Everyone gathered around the table. 3 generations of the family Fletcher and Paloma had created. As Fletcher sat at the head of the table, watching his loved ones eat and laugh and argue and tease, he felt a profound sense of peace. This was what he had fought for that day when the Garrett gang came. This was what Paloma had been brave enough to hope for when she stayed instead of running, this family, this home, this life. After lunch, Fletcher walked out to the porch, needing a moment of quiet. Alina followed him, settling into the chair beside his. "You look thoughtful, Papa," she said. "Just remembering." "Tell me again about the day you met Mama." Fletcher smiled. His children never tired of the story, and neither did he. So he told her, describing that September evening in 1878, the stranger with blood on her sleeve and desperation in her eyes, the words she had spoken and his response. "I bring only trouble and sorrow," Alina quoted. "And you said, 'Then I will turn them into joy.' And you did. We did. Together." Fletcher looked at his daughter, this fierce woman who had broken so many barriers. "That is the secret, Alina. You cannot do it alone. Joy, real joy, comes from sharing your life with someone you love. I know. You and Mama taught us that." Paloma joined them on the porch, carrying glasses of lemonade. She handed them out and settled into her own chair with a contented sigh. "What are you two talking about?" "Just how Papa is a romantic," Alina teased. "I could have told you that. He has been writing me poetry for 40 years. "Bad poetry," Fletcher added. "The worst," Paloma agreed fondly. "But I love it anyway." Alina left them to check on her own children, and Fletcher and Paloma sat in comfortable silence. The afternoon was warm but not hot, a perfect spring day. In the distance, they could see their grandchildren playing near the barn, supervised by Robert and his wife. "You think they understand?" Paloma asked. "How lucky we are, they will. When they are older, when they have lived enough to appreciate it." Fletcher reached for her hand. "But yes, I think they do. We raise them to understand that family matters, that love matters. You raise them well." "We raise them well," Paloma laughed. "All right, we raise them well, together." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Fletcher thought about all the sunsets he had watched from this porch. Thousands of them over the years, each one beautiful, each one a gift. And always, Paloma beside him. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Fletcher woke to find Paloma standing at the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "Cannot sleep?" he asked, just thinking. She turned to him. "I never thanked you properly, you know, for saving my life. You have thanked me 1,000 times. Not for that day in the saloon, for every day after, for choosing me over and over again for 40 years. She came back to bed, curling against his side. "I was so broken when I met you, so sure that I did not deserve good things, and you loved me anyway. You were never broken. Hurt, yes. Scared, but never broken." Fletcher kissed her forehead. "And I did not love you anyway. I loved you because you were brave and strong and determined to survive. I loved you because you saw the worst of humanity and still chose kindness. I loved you because you were you." "I love you, Fletcher Sutton." "I love you too, Paloma Sutton, more than anything in this world." They fell asleep holding each other, the way they had for 40 years, the way they would continue to for whatever time they had left. Two people who had found each other in the chaos of the Wild West, who had built a life from nothing but love and determination. The years continued their steady march. Fletcher and Paloma grew older, slower, but never lost the connection that had bound them from the beginning. They still took evening walks around the ranch, still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still held hands like newlyweds. When Fletcher was 70, he fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor was worried, given his age, but Paloma refused to accept that she might lose him. She nursed him day and night, bullying him into eating and drinking, reading to him when he was too weak to stay awake for long. "You are not leaving me," she told him fiercely. "Not yet. We have too many sunsets left to see." And somehow, impossibly, he recovered. The doctor called it a miracle. Fletcher called it the sheer force of his wife's will. Either way, he was grateful for every additional day they were granted. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1931, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The family had grown so large that they had to hold the celebration in the barn, tables set up and decorated with wildflowers Paloma loved. Fletcher stood to give a toast, his voice wavering with age but still strong. 50 years ago, I made a promise to a scared woman in a saloon. I told her I would turn her trouble and sorrow into joy. Looking around this room today at all of you, I think I can say we did all right." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Paloma rose to stand beside him, taking his hand. "Fletcher Sutton gave me everything," she said. "A home when I had none, hope when I had given up, love when I thought I was not worthy of it, and this family, all of you, are the proof that love wins, that kindness matters, that choosing to help someone even when it is hard or scary can change the world." She turned to Fletcher. "You are my joy. You have been for 50 years and you will be for whatever time we have left. I love you. I love you too." They kissed, to the cheers and hoots of their family, and Fletcher thought that this was everything he had ever wanted. This moment, these people, this life. Fletcher passed peacefully in his sleep on a winter night in 1935, with Paloma holding his hand. He was 78 years old, had lived a full and happy life, and died knowing he was deeply loved. Paloma followed him 2 years later, also peacefully, also in her sleep. Their children found her in her chair on the porch, a blanket over her lap and a smile on her face, as though she had seen something wonderful in her final moments. They were buried side by side on a hill, overlooking the Triple R Ranch, under a sky so blue and wide it seemed to go on forever. Their headstone reads simply, Fletcher and Paloma Sutton. They turned sorrow into joy. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through their children and their children's children. The story of how it all began was never forgotten, told and retold at every family gathering. The story of a cowboy who offered kindness to a stranger, and the woman who was brave enough to accept it. The story of a love that withstood every trial, grew stronger with every year, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the New Mexico desert, painting the whole sky gold and rose, ranch hands swore they could see two figures on the porch of the old house. A man and a woman, sitting close together, watching the sunset and holding hands. The ghost of a cowboy who had kept his promise. The spirit of a woman who had learned to trust again. Together, even in death, turning trouble and sorrow into eternal joy. But they were not ghosts, not really. They lived on in every member of the family they had created. In every act of kindness their descendants showed. In every person who heard their story and decided to be brave enough to help someone in need. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton had built more than a ranch. They had built a legacy of love that would never die. Proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is offer your hand to someone who has fallen and help them stand again. And in doing so, you might just find your own salvation. Their great-great-granddaughter, another Paloma, stood on that same hill 60 years after their deaths, looking out over the ranch that had been in her family for more than a century. She was 23, the same age her ancestor had been when she rode into Piñon seeking sanctuary. "Tell me again," said the man beside her, a cowboy named Frank who worked the ranch and had recently begun courting her. "About my great-great-grandparents." "Yes." So Paloma told him the story the way it had been told to her. About trouble and sorrow, about a cowboy who saw past the surface to the person beneath, about choosing love over fear. About a promise made and kept, day after day, year after year, until it had become more than a promise. It had become a life. When she finished, Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That is some legacy to live up to." "Yes, but that is what makes it meaningful." Paloma looked at him. "The world still needs people who are willing to turn sorrow into joy, who see someone hurting and choose to help rather than walk away. You think we can do that?" "Live up to their example. I think we can try. That is all anyone can do." Frank took her hand and they stood together on the hill, watching the sun set over the land Fletcher and Paloma had loved. The same sun that had set countless times before, that would continue to set long after they were gone. Eternal and unchanging, a reminder that some things endure. Love endures. Kindness endures. Hope endures. And sometimes when the world seems dark and full of trouble, all it takes is one person brave enough to say, "I will help you. I will stand with you. I will turn your sorrow into joy." Fletcher Sutton had been that person for Paloma Garcia. And in return, she had given him a life beyond his wildest dreams. Together, they had proven that the old stories were true, that love could conquer all, that happily ever after was not just a fairy tale but something you built with your own hands day by day, choice by choice. The Triple R Ranch stood as a monument to that truth. Not just a business, not just land and buildings and livestock, but a living testament to what two people could create when they chose love over fear, trust over suspicion, hope over despair. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, Paloma the younger thought she heard something on the wind. Laughter, maybe, or the echo of an old promise kept. She smiled and leaned against Frank, feeling the solid warmth of him, the potential of something just beginning. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I want what they had, not the ranch, not the legacy, but that kind of love, that partnership, that knowing someone will stand with you no matter what. That sounds good to me too." They walked back to the house together as full dark fell, following a path worn smooth by generations of feet. The same path Fletcher and Paloma had walked countless times, the same earth they had tended and loved. Inside, the house was warm and bright, filled with family gathered for Sunday dinner. The tradition continued, unbroken across the decades. Every Sunday, everyone who could manage it came home to the Triple R. They ate together, laughed together, told the old stories and made new memories. It was what Fletcher and Paloma had built. It was what would continue long after everyone currently living was gone. A legacy of love, passed down through the generations like a precious heirloom, polished and treasured and shared. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go after death, Fletcher and Paloma Sutton watched over the family they had created and smiled. They had done good work in their time on earth. They had taken broken pieces and made something whole. They had faced darkness and chosen light. They had kept their promise to each other and in doing so had given the world something precious. A reminder that love matters, that kindness matters, that every person you meet is carrying their own trouble and sorrow, and sometimes all they need is someone to say, "I see you. I believe in you. Let me help." Fletcher had said those words to Paloma in a dusty saloon in Pinon, New Mexico in 1878. She had been brave enough to believe him. Together, they had built a life that mattered, that left the world better than they found it. That is all anyone can hope for. To love well and be loved in return. To build something that endures. To turn sorrow into joy, one day at a time, one choice at a time, until suddenly you look back and realize you have created something beautiful. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton did that. They lived their promise every single day, through good times and hard times, through youth and age, through every challenge life threw at them. They loved each other fiercely and without reservation, and that love rippled outward, touching everyone they encountered. Their story was not unique, not really. All across the West, in tiny towns and remote ranches, people were making similar choices every day, choosing to help instead of walk away, choosing love over fear, building lives from nothing but determination and hope. But their story mattered to the people who came after them. It mattered to their children and grandchildren and all the generations that would follow. It mattered because it was proof that one moment of kindness could change everything. That one person reaching out could start a chain reaction of good that would last long beyond their lifetime. When the last member of the family finally left the Triple R, when the ranch was sold and became something else, the story still endured. It was written down, passed along, shared with anyone who would listen. The story of a cowboy and a woman on the run, of a promise made and kept, of sorrow turned to joy. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the light is just right, you can still see them. Not on the ranch, which is long gone, but in the faces of lovers holding hands, in the smile of someone helping a stranger, in every act of kindness, great or small, that makes the world a little bit better. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton live on in those moments. Their love, their courage, their unwavering commitment to each other and to doing right, these things are eternal. They transcend time and place, speaking to something fundamental in the human heart, the need to be seen, the need to be loved, the need to know that your life matters, that your choices make a difference, that somewhere in this vast and often harsh world, There is someone who will stand with you against the darkness. Fletcher gave that to Paloma. She gave it back to him. And together, they gave it to everyone who came after, a gift more precious than gold or land or any material wealth, the gift of hope, the gift of love, the gift of knowing that trouble and sorrow are not the end of the story, but merely the beginning of something beautiful. That is the legacy of Fletcher and Paloma Sutton. Not the ranch they built or the business they created, but the love they shared and the example they set. A reminder that every day we have the choice to be someone's Fletcher. To see past the surface, to offer help without judgment, to believe in someone when they have forgotten how to believe in themselves. And we also have the choice to be Paloma, to be brave enough to accept help, to trust again after betrayal, to build a new life from the ashes of the old, to believe that joy is possible even when sorrow seems to have the upper hand. These choices, made every day by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, are what build a better world. One person at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one promise kept at a time. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton understood this. They lived it. And their story, told and retold across the years, continues to inspire anyone who hears it. Because in the end, that is what we all want: to love and be loved, to matter to someone, to leave the world a little bit better than we found it, to turn our own sorrow into joy, and in doing so, help others do the same. That is the promise Fletcher made to Paloma on that September evening in 1878. That is the promise they kept for the rest of their lives. And that is the promise that endures, passed down through the generations, a light in the darkness that can never be extinguished. As long as there are people who believe in love, who believe in kindness, who believe that every person deserves a chance at happiness, Fletcher and Paloma Sutton will live on. Not as ghosts or memories, but as an example of what is possible when you have the courage to reach out, to connect, to choose hope over despair. Their story is our story. Their choices are our choices. Their legacy is the world we build every day with our own hands and hearts. And that is the greatest gift they could have given us. Not the details of their lives, but the reminder that we too can turn sorrow into joy. We too can make promises and keep them. We too can build something that endures. All it takes is courage and love, and the willingness to believe that tomorrow can be better than today, that broken things can be mended, that trouble is not the end but merely a challenge to overcome. Fletcher saw that possibility in Paloma when she stumbled into the saloon, wounded and desperate. He chose to act on it, to offer his hand and his help without reservation. And she, despite every reason to keep running, to trust no one, to believe that she was beyond saving, she chose to accept. That moment changed everything, not just for them, but for everyone their lives would touch. Their children, their grandchildren, the ranch hands they employed, the community they were part of. Ripples spreading outward from a single act of kindness, touching countless lives. That is the power of love. That is the power of choice. That is the power each of us holds every day to make a difference. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton chose wisely. They chose love. They chose hope. They chose each other, over and over again, until death parted them and love reunited them in whatever lies beyond. Their story has an ending, but their legacy continues. Every person who hears their tale and decides to be a little kinder, a little braver, a little more willing to help someone in need, they carry Fletcher and Paloma forward into the future. That is immortality. Not living forever, but creating something that does. An idea, a value, a way of being in the world that transcends the limits of a single lifetime. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton are immortal because love is immortal, because kindness is immortal, because the human capacity for hope and connection and courage is immortal. Their story reminds us of this truth, and in doing so, it gives us the strength to face our own troubles, to overcome our own sorrows, to build our own joy. That is the gift they gave us. That is the promise they kept. And that is why, more than a century after they first met in a dusty saloon in Pinon, New Mexico, their story still matters, still inspires, still reminds us that love, true love, is the most powerful force in the universe. Fletcher said he would turn Paloma's trouble and sorrow into joy. He did. And together, they turned that joy into a legacy that will never die. That is the story. That is the promise. That is the enduring truth of Fletcher and Paloma Sutton, cowboy and survivor, husband and wife, two souls who found each other in the chaos of the Wild West and built something eternal. Their love story ended, as all love stories must, with death and separation. But the love itself never ended. It lives on in every descendant who carries their blood, in every person who hears their story and is inspired by it, in every act of kindness done in their memory. Fletcher and Paloma Sutton turned sorrow into joy, and in doing so they gave the world a gift more precious than gold, the gift of hope, the gift of possibility, the gift of knowing that no matter how dark things seem, love can light the way forward. That is their legacy. That is their story. That is the promise they made and kept, not just to each other, but to all of us who come after. A reminder that we are not alone, that help is possible, that joy awaits if we are brave enough to reach for it. And sometimes, on quiet evenings in New Mexico, when the sun sets over the desert in shades of gold and rose, you can almost hear them. An echo of laughter, a whisper of love, the sound of two souls who found each other and never let go, Fletcher and Paloma Sutton. Together forever, their love eternal, their promise kept. That is how their story ends, and how it continues always and forever in the hearts of everyone who believes that love is stronger than fear, that joy can overcome sorrow, that one person reaching out to another can change the world.